In this video, we are talking about 4 breakouts and 4 sleepers in week 6 of fantasy football. But before we get into it, take a look at this graphic as it shows that only 8% of you who are watching my videos are subscribed to the channel. So if you could please take a second, subscribe to the channel, like the video, I'd really appreciate it. Starting with the breakouts, we had Zay Flowers and Garrett Wilson on this list last week. But for this week, at number 4, it's Odunze, who is the Bears' second best receiver behind DJ Moore, with the 32-year-old Keenan Allen showing his age at this point, right? Like, he has had a really bad year. Yes, he's been hurt, but he just isn't the same player. And Chicago's offense finally got it going last week, where Caleb Williams threw for over 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. This might be the game that they needed to finally get it going. But what's even more encouraging is Odunze ran 97% of the routes, which was tied with DJ Moore for the team lead. And Rome isn't just any rookie, right? He's an elite prospect that the Bears spent the 9th overall pick on. His final year at Washington, he racked up over 1,600 receiving yards, 14 total touchdowns. He is a really good player that Chicago wants to use. I don't think they're going to continue letting Keenan Allen play over Odunze. Like, we're already seeing the shift between the two receivers. This is the time you want to buy Rome now while his value is at an all-time low. Yes, he's had one big blow-up game this year, but outside of that, he hasn't done much. If you can get Odunze on your team for cheap now, I would take advantage of that, because the matchup this week against the Jaguars is juicy, as Jacksonville is allowing the most fantasy points per game and yards to the wide receiver position. Odunze is going to be a league winner the second half of the year, and I think he has a blow-up performance in week 6. And then Chicago goes on bye in week 7. We know rookies coming out of bye weeks get a nice bump in their production and usage. And Rome has a really favorable schedule for the rest of the year. And if he's on your roster already, I would be starting him in your flex this week. At number 3, Jaylen Warren has been dealing with a knee injury all year long. It's been extremely frustrating. We haven't really seen much of him at all. But this Pittsburgh offense really needs Warren back, as he's arguably their most important player on offense. Najee Harris just looks terrible. We know this at this point. Harris is not a good running back. Cordell Patterson is injured. He's old, even though Arthur Smith will continue to use Patterson when he's healthy. But don't forget how good of a running back Warren was last year. First in missed tackles forced per attempt, second in yards after contact per attempt, third in explosive run rate, 5.5 yards created per touch last year, which was 7th in the league. Warren, once he is healthy, is far and away the Steelers' best running back. It's not even close on a Pittsburgh team that wants to run the football with Arthur Smith as the new offensive coordinator. It's looking like Warren is probably going to play this week, as he's logged already 2 limited practices. And if you look at the tape of him practicing, he looks really good. He looks really explosive. And he's another guy I'd be buying low now before this week, because I think he is going to be a really good player the second half of the fantasy season. And in week 6, he gets an absolute cakewalk of a matchup against a very beatable Raiders defense, as they have allowed 5.2 yards per carry to the running back position. And every single running back who has played them this year has scored 15 plus fantasy points. That is too good to pass up on. So if he's on your team, get him in your lineup. At number 2, McConkey has been the Chargers' #1 wide receiver so far this year, sporting a 25.8% target share, 30% air yard share, 2.2 yards per route run, and a 30% first read share. Yes, he's on a run-heavy Chargers offense, unfortunately, but he still has Justin Herbert as his quarterback, and he appears to be his favorite target at this point. And Ladd has still made the most of his opportunities, everything considered, as he already has 2 top 20 finishes on the year, and had his best game in week 4 against Kansas City, where he had 5 catches for 67 yards, that really nice touchdown in the red zone, resulting in 17.7 fantasy points. If you watch McConkey, it's clear and evident that he's a really good receiver. He passes the eye test. He's got impressive burst, explosiveness, along with very reliable hands. The Chargers are going to have to throw more at times when they're trailing in football games. And when that happens, Herbert is going to be looking for McConkey. Even in a brutal matchup against Denver, I think Ladd can avoid Pat Surtain by moving him inside, playing a lot out of the slot, and Ladd has been one of the best receivers against man coverage. And guess what defense runs the most man coverage? The Broncos, 48% of the time, most in the NFL. I have no problem putting Ladd in your lineup this week and would be trying to get him on your team now before week 6. Buy him low. All these guys that we've talked about, acquire them for cheap. And I think McConkey is going to have a big game in week 6. At number 1, Tank Dell. It's been a very rough start for Dell as he's the wide receiver 70 in fantasy. That's definitely not what you were expecting when you drafted him. But you have to remember Tank is still recovering from that brutal leg injury that he suffered late last year. And then he got shot in the leg. He is clearly not the same player. He's clearly trying to recover from both of those injuries. And while it may take time for Dell to get his explosiveness back, don't forget what Tank did in year 1. From weeks 9 to 12, he was the wide receiver 3, averaging 20.5 fantasy points per game. We know the talent that he has, the connection, the chemistry that he has with CJ Stroud, and there will be plenty of opportunities now for him to take advantage with Nico Collins on IR. He's going to be out for at least the next 4 weeks. And in week 6, with Stephon Diggs likely seeing a ton of stud corner Christian Gonzalez for the Patriots, Dell is going to have plenty of opportunities, and it would not shock me at all if he has a monster breakout performance in week 6. On to the sleepers part of the video. Last week we had Josh Downs on the list. Starting at number 4, Dontayvion Wicks. Life comes at you very fast in fantasy football. 1 week, everyone's dropping a bag, spending all their fab on Wicks, and then the next week, people are dropping Dontayvion. No one wants to start him. People are trying to trade him away. It's an absolute disaster. But as Aaron Rodgers famously said when he was with the Packers, relax. I think Wicks is going to be fine. Yes, he disappointed in week 5. Yes, he had a lot of bad drops. It was disappointing to see, but Jordan Love did miss him on what probably would have been a 50-yard touchdown. He underthrew him. Wicks had a high point the ball, didn't end up catching it. But if he would have just led Wicks down the field, it probably would have been a score, and the narrative around Dontayvion would have been quite different had that not happened. But in week 5, Wicks was still tied for the team lead in target share at 23% and led all Green Bay wide receivers in air yard share at 44%. Dontayvion has had 20 targets over the last 2 weeks. Yes, 13 of them came in week 4, but that type of volume cannot be ignored, especially when Jordan Love is throwing you the football. Yes, Romeo Doubs is going to be back this week. Christian Watson is trending towards playing. If he misses this week, he will probably be back next. But I think Dontayvion is a nice sleeper in week 6 against the Arizona Cardinals, because this is fantasy football. When everyone benches a guy, the following week, he's probably going to go off, let's be honest. And Arizona has allowed the 3rd highest PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers, and Wicks could very well be heavily involved in this one in a game that has shootout potential. At number 3, Demario Douglas. This entire New England offense gets a major boost with 3rd overall pick Drake May finally taking over under center as the quarterback 1, and Douglas has looked good in the limited opportunities that he's had with Jacoby Brissett under center, and he's coming off a solid game against Miami where he had 6 catches for 59 yards on 9 targets, resulting in 11.9 fantasy points. Not terrible, but you can't expect much with Brissett under center. I like Douglas as a player. He's fast, he's explosive, he's twitchy. He's a guy that can score from anywhere on the football field. That is someone I want on my team. If I'm in a pinch this week with all these injuries, 4 teams on bye, I think he's a nice option if you are really desperate. New England will likely be trailing in this one against the Houston Texans. Even without Nico Collins, I think Houston is going to be able to put up a lot of points. And hopefully Douglas can avoid Derek Stingley Jr., the really good corner for the Texans, because if he can, I think he will be in for a nice day. And I think Douglas is going to be May's go-to target, safety blanket, if you will, underneath, resulting in a good amount of receptions. And I think he's going to put up a nice performance, especially in PPR leagues. At number 2, Calvin Ridley has done next to nothing this year outside of his big performance in week 2 against the New York Jets, where he found the end zone twice. But with Will Levis likely going to play coming out of a bye, yes, he had that AC joint sprain in his shoulder. We want Levis to be under center, right? Because he's a gunslinger. He doesn't care as much. He'll chuck it 50 yards into triple coverage. It doesn't matter to Levis, but that's good news for Ridley for fantasy because he's going to at least give Calvin a shot to score a long touchdown, which it would not shock me at all if Ridley has one of those vintage 55, 60-yard scores. And if you've listened to the Titans coaches this week, all they've talked about is how they need to get Ridley the ball, get him in space. He needs to touch the football more week in and week out. So if you're reading into that, it's probably going to be a big Ridley week, especially against the Colts, who have been torched by perimeter wide receivers all year long. They've given up big games to George Pickens, Rome Odunze, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., Calvin Ridley is up next, and it would not shock me at all if he is a monster week 6. At number 1, Roschon Johnson. I will admit, it's tough in these streets right now to give you guys some good sleepers because of 4 teams on bye, which we mentioned. So many injuries across the board, but Roschon Johnson, one thing we do know is that he does score touchdowns, as he has 3 touchdowns over his last 2 games. And make no mistake, Johnson possesses a 3-down skill set. Like, if the Bears were to ever use him more in a pass down role, he can get the job done. He's a good pass down back. He's a good receiving back. He is explosive. He's not getting the opportunities right now. But if you're looking for a guy to plug into your lineup that probably falls into the end zone again and doesn't give you much else, then look no further than Johnson. Remember, he's a sleeper. Maybe he has a bigger day, but the expectations are relatively low. It's a good matchup against Jacksonville, who have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to the running back position. So he's a guy that he could put up a big day. He could have 2 scores. We would like to see him more involved in the passing game, but all you can hope for here is that he falls into the end zone and gets a good amount of yards. And heck, even if you don't start him, he's a good guy to have on your bench because Swift has proven in the past that he can't stay healthy. He always seems to be banged up. And if DeAndre were to go down at any point this season, Roschon would be thrusted into an RB1 role on Chicago, and that would be very valuable for fantasy. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you could please subscribe to the channel, like the video. It helps me out more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.